Since the development of the auteur theory in the 40s and 50s, that being that the film director is the major driving creative force behind the film, many filmmakers have been labeled as auteurs, from older filmmakers like Jean-Luc Godard, Andrei Tarkovsky, and Ingmar Bergman, to more modern filmmakers who learned from them, like Wes Anderson, Denis Villeneuve, and Quentin Tarantino. Each of these filmmakers have developed their own personal style of filmmaking, with their films standing out as uniquely theirs, stemming from filmmaking techniques, personal styles, and connected themes across their bodies of work. But there's one modern-day filmmaker who is rarely talked about in the same terms, especially in the US, despite being one of the truest manifestations of this theory, that being Quentin Dupieux.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Quentin Dupieux, je crois.
Before I get into Dupieux's directing style, productions, and themes, let me just run through the man's career. Although he was born in Paris and interested in filmmaking from a young age, he actually got his start making music, which he would then shoot music videos for. Under the name Monsieur Oiseau, and behind a puppet named Flat Eric, he would produce a couple of house and techno albums. His feature-length movie Steak would be released in France to mixed reviews, and it wasn't until his second movie Rubber, which was released in the US, arguably the movie he's most well known for, that he would gain some recognition. Now, I'm gonna read off what some of his movies are about, and even though they may sound crazy, I promise I'll get back to talking about it when I get into his directing style and themes. Rubber revolves around a sentient killer tire in a desert with mind control powers that goes around exploding people's heads. Whatever confusion you may have about how that premise could possibly make a coherent movie, I think sets a pretty good tone for his work across the board, even though personally I wasn't the greatest fan of Rubber. He would then shoot 3 movies in the US before returning to his native France, where his body of work really began to take form. Since 2018, he has shot 8 movies in France, including Keep an Eye Out, about a police detective interrogating a murder suspect who definitely did not commit the crime, Deerskin, which follows a man recently separated from his family who becomes obsessed with his new jacket so much that he wants to be the only person in the world who owns a jacket, Mandibles, about 2 bums who discover and then try to tame a housefly the size of a pig, Incredible But True, which follows a middle-aged couple who buy a new house and discover a portal in their basement that can both travel distance and time, but in unconventional ways. Smoking Causes Coughing, which follows a group of tobacco-based superheroes and their boss, a talking rat, as they fight against their arch-nemesis. Yannick, a man who becomes so annoyed with the play that he's watching that he decides to write his own. And Daaaaaali, which follows a journalist who keeps running into different iterations of Dali as she tries to create a documentary about him, and an as-of-yet unreleased film called The Second Act. As I'm sure you can tell, not only do his stories revolve around very strange and unconventional topics, but the pace at which he makes movies is comparable to that of Hong Sang-soo and Rainer Werner Fassbinder, both of which shot movies at a pace of 2, sometimes even 3 per year. This shouldn't be surprising though, as Dupieux writes, directs, does the cinematography for, and edits almost all of his work. It also helps that Dupieux's movies rarely ever cross the 90-minute mark, with some of them being as short as just an hour. And where that might be seen as a weakness for some films, in Dupieux's case, it's certainly something that helps him. His movies never overstay their welcome, often move at a quick pace, but still manage to work with such unique stories and images that they linger for a lot longer than they actually are. His movies are typically composed of entirely static shots, more washed out colors, and interestingly enough, always tries to use practical effects when filming, meaning yes, that giant fly was real. Like most auteurs, he also tends to reuse a lot of his cast and crew, like his wife, who also serves as his production designer, and he's also worked with well-known French actors and singers, from Adèle Exarchopoulos, Alain Chabat, Jean Dujardin, Adèle Hanel, Aurel San, and Benoît Poulvador. That Benoît Poulvador.
J'ai perdu ma gourmette, un bracelet quoi. Oh merde.
Sentimental?
Communion, hein. Surtout eu du mal à la voler, hein. Un gosse qui aura le même prénom que moi, je retrouverai pas ça 2 fois, hein.
As you've probably figured out by now, all of his movies are dark comedies with surrealist elements that take a seemingly simple idea or object that takes its characters to extremes. A lot of these are further explored through the framing of the story, which often involves questioning the relationship between the audience and what they're watching. For example, Rubber is framed through a group of observers in the desert that is also sometimes narrated by a sheriff that says, sometimes in cinema, things happen for no reason. The protagonist of Deerskin, once he starts murdering people for wearing jackets, films all of his actions, claiming it's going to be a very cool documentary. Smoking Causes Coughing is portrayed as a spoof of children's superhero shows like Power Rangers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Keep an Eye Out has the story of how someone found a dead body framed through an interrogation, which is also later revealed to have been a play all along, which Dupieux pointed out in an interview was actually kind of a reference to Buñuel's The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. Many of his films toy with the idea of the relationship between art and stories and those that view them. And while many of his films deal with this idea, I think the one that does it the most directly has got to be Yannick. Now, I don't think I can spoil this movie because it is very much about everything that happens in the film and not just the ending, but I will give a little spoiler warning here for those who want to go into the movie knowing nothing. As mentioned earlier, Yannick follows a man who is disappointed with the play he is watching. He tells everyone that he has a very demanding job that forces him to work irregular hours, and to watch this theater performance, not only did he have to travel an hour to the cinema, but he also had to take one of his few days off of work. The show is supposed to make him feel better, but it's so horrible it's having the opposite effect. After a quick back and forth, Yannick takes out a gun, holds the theater hostage, and decides he will write a new script for the actors to perform. Throughout the movie, we don't get to learn much about him, but we do get hints. He is at times too honest to the point of hurting people's feelings. His job with its irregular work hours prevents him from building meaningful relationships. He spends a lot of time alone, and he understands very well when someone is being fake nice to him just so he can go away. At the end of the movie, as the actors put on Yannick's play, a story about a man who seems to be in a coma but is actually just comatose because he believes nobody loves him, we get to see Yannick and all the other people in the theater actually happy for once. For the majority of the film, people have been scared, annoyed, sometimes amused, but the movie ends with everyone laughing. The last time we see Yannick, he's sitting on the floor off to the side of the actors, giving them praise for how well they're doing, and we can see that he's genuinely touched by how the audience and the actors received his play. And I really like that the movie ended on this strangely emotional beat, something that most of his other films typically don't. Even though we know virtually nothing about these characters, watching a man that is clearly dissatisfied with his life take in this one moment where he not only gets to write the characters and set the stage, but also receive genuine laughter is really heartwarming. I don't want to ramble on for too much longer because I do think his movies are better experienced than talked about, but I did want to make this video to bring his work to more people's attention, and I do hope that you get to check out some of his work. Quite a bit of it, including Yannick, is actually streaming on Mubi. And since I've watched all of his movies with the exception of Steak and Daaaaaali, which isn't released outside of France yet, I figured I would end this with a quick ranking of his filmography in my opinion, which would go Wrong Cops, Rubber, Reality, Wrong, Smoking Causes Coughing, Keep an Eye Out, Incredible But True, Mandibles, Yannick, Deerskin. Very excited for where his career will go in the future, especially now that his next film, The Second Act, is going to open the 2024 Cannes Film Festival, as well as star Léa Seydoux, Vincent Lindon, Louis Garrel, and Raphaël Quentin. Apparently the film is also reported to have the longest tracking shot in the history of cinema, which is pretty cool. Anyways, that's it for this video. If you check out any of his work, make sure to come back and let me know, and maybe we can talk about it. Peace.